Thank you. Well, and just to reflect on what Melissa has said, I hope you guys had a great lunch. I don't want you to fall asleep in this segment. I get you guys before lunch, I get you guys after lunch. So there's no excuse. If you need to get up and stretch, we're going to start off with a quick little exercise. I'd love for everybody in the chat box. This is a little exercise for your fingers. If you could type in where you're coming in from, where you're watching, where you're attending this conference, I'd love to see the chat. And please don't put Narnia or a galaxy far, far away. Be realistic. Salt Lake City, Logan, Utah. Uh, okay. So we got a territory coming in: Orem, Salt Lake, Taylorsville, Murray, Los Angeles, Bay Area. George, be more specific. Where in the Bay Area? Salt Lake City, Mexico. Living in Kearns, Salt Lake City, South Ogden. All right. Seattle in the house. Hey. I don't know what Toel is. San Bruno, Auckland, New Zealand, San Mateo. You don't need to private message me to tell me where you're coming in from, please. Just put in the chat box. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You might have slipped your hand finger,
Safe
might have slipped.
space. It's a safe
La,
space.
La San Francisco, St. George, Iowa. All right. Now that I got that out of the way, I just wanted to see that everybody was awake. You got your fingers moving, you got your brain flowing. I'm no neuroscientist and none of that stuff. I just like to have people engaged. And I see some smiley faces. I see Serafina. Well, thank you for coming in. I see my brother Sydney over there. I see Trina Hafaday. All right. See, I remember you from yesterday. And if you guys haven't been a part of this conference, you missed out yesterday. You missed a whole day. I'm just saying, next time we put something up, show up. Just show up. Some good stuff going on here. So this segment is presented by K.A.V.A Talks. Earlier, I introduced myself. K.A.V.A Talks is knowledge against violence always. It is an all men's group for you women in here. If you have a partner who identifies as male or is actually a male, bring them to K.A.V.A Talks. Invite them to K.A.V.A Talks. If you don't know how to get to K.A.V.A Talks, ask Susie. Ask one of the people who brought you into this conference. We'd love to have them in there. K.A.V.A Talks is every other Thursday. Normally we would have it yesterday, but because of this conference, I actually canceled it. So I'd love to invite everybody to come in. It's a very simple space. It's a safe space. Everything we say in there is confidential. Whatever is said in K.A.V.A Circle stays in the K.A.V.A Circle. With that being said, I'd like to introduce my guest today. On the program, we have two people. We were supposed to bring Nigel on and Dr. Alo. Dr. Alo is not responding. I just hope and pray that everything's okay with him, but that doesn't mean that the show can't go on. So with that being said, let me introduce you to my only speaker that's going to be with me on my panel today, Nigel Vagana. It's not Vagana, it's not Vagana, it's Nigel Vagana. Is a dual rugby league international player, having represented both New Zealand and Samoa in his 14-year career as a professional rugby league player. He is a World Cup Nines and Tri-Nations winner for New Zealand and has received multiple NRL awards, that's National Rugby League. He has captained New Zealand and has played in 3 World Cups. Most recently, he captained the Toa Samoa in 2008. He retired as New Zealand's all-time leading try scorer at international level. Try scorer means touchdown, something similar to scoring. Nigel is the only player in the history of rugby league to have topped the try scoring chart in both the Southern, the NRL, and the Northern Super League Hemisphere Elite Rugby League competition. That in itself is a feat. Nigel retired in 2009 and was employed by the National Rugby League Education and Wellbeing programs as the manager. He headed up the NRL Pacific Cultural Wellbeing Program, which has gone from strength to strength since inception. The program is now widely regarded as the best in Australasian run for elite athletes. He is now based in New Zealand, developed a well-being program for the elite rugby player and league athletes, officials, and is moving through the community, building pathways into professional environments. He co-designed the current NZR, the New Zealand Rugby League Organizational Wellbeing Plan, and has only recently stepped down as the general manager for football and wellbeing for the New Zealand Rugby League. Nigel has been invited to present at many elite athletes and organizations, including the Royal Australian College of Surgeons, the Australian Defence Forces, Australian Federal Police, the Cricket New South Wales, U.S. Professional Associate of Athletes Development and Specialists, also known as PADS, the National Football League, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, LPGA, ATP, WWE, NCAA, and Major League Soccer. He is also presented at UCLA, Boston College, and the University of Utah, the Rugby League, National Super League in England, and also I want to say, my notes are nuts here, Santiago, Chile.
That's enough, Paulie. That's enough.
Well, you can't cut me off. I'm trying to build a stage here. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, give him a big round of applause, Nigel Vagana. Nigel,
Thank you.
It was very important. First of all, thank you for waking up early Saturday morning to be on this call. It was really important to me to read those things, because one of the things that I wanted us to touch on and touch base on before I let you explain some of your experiences in our different communities is we're often, as people, associated with either academia or athletics, first and foremost. And then somewhere in between there, it finagles to, oh, that's just the big guy, or that's just the guy over there that does this and this. But academia and athletics, in this case, I wanted to bring up the athletic side, which was the conversation I wanted to have with us today. In your work as a professional athlete, you've been able to see not just the growth of our population in professional rugby in Australia and New Zealand, but you've also helped them build the programs, which I wanted to talk about in wellness. Today's topic is based on sports, violence, and the effect. We know that sports is a pathway for a lot of our youth to get into a better life, education, to help the family out. But something I don't know where the shift has happened or how it's changed, to where I'm noticing, especially on the United States part, that a lot of parents are pressuring their children to either be football players or to become professional football players, not for the sake that they can get an education, but it almost seems like they're betting their meal ticket on it, where I'm seeing parents quit their jobs, following their kids around, making sure that, and if the kid is hurt, there's a undue pressure that's put on the child that feels like, man, if I don't play this week, I'm not going to be able to feed my family. And that's what I wanted for us to go in and to discuss. And in your work, I noticed that when the NFL brought you out here to run programs with the Polynesian or the Pacific Island players that we have that are in the NFL, there seems to be a drastic drop. We go from high school. We go from high school, where almost every kid plays. Then they get into the college level. And then somewhere between the college level to the professional level, it significantly drops off. So I'd love for you, if we could touch on that, and if you could share with us some of your experiences of what you've seen. And then I'm going to allow it again, as Ming referred, if you feel moved to ask a question, just ask. You're not interrupting. This is a conversation. This is a lotofale. Just enjoy the conversation, and I hope we add value to how you guys are dealing with people in your communities. Nigel.
That's a long question there, Paulie. Firstly, talofa everyone. I hope you guys are enjoying the conference, and I hope you understand my accent. I haven't had lunch yet. It's 8 o'clock in the morning over here. So after this, I'll go and have some breakfast, but I appreciate you guys having me on board and jumping into your conversation. So I have had a bit of experience working with a lot of different organizations around setting up programs for athletes coming through the system. A lot of the programs that currently exist for a lot of these athletes don't really fit the mold of how we grow as people, I guess. So a lot of the systems were pretty much my way or the highway, one size fits all. But as we saw a lot more Pacific athletes coming into the environment, we understood the need and felt the need that we needed to change change tack and set up specific programs to cater for the specific needs of our Pacific athletes. So there's a lot of different things that I've been involved in the past. One of the first things, programs that I did from memory about 10 or so years ago was we set up language classes for our athletes. And it was actually so we set up Samoan, Tongan, and Māori language classes and offered them for free as part of being in the environment. And I guess the thought process behind that was to try and get our athletes more connected to their roots. We found that a lot of guys were sort of physically strong and able, but mentally missing, lacking, and a lot of that might have been a bit of purpose, might have been a bit of connection, might have been a bit of motivation towards some deeper, I guess, deeper issues that carried into the system or that brought into the system. So one thing we try to do was try and get them to find out more about themselves and their own identity, and then off the back of that, develop them the longer that they're in the environment. You know, and so there was a lot of benefits off the back of that, but we also that also helped set up our cultural programs in the NRL down here in Australia and New Zealand, you know, and sort of led to a lot more programs, a lot more understanding, and also a lot more education to not so much the Pacific athletes, but the people working with them, the coaches, the trainers, the administrators, the CEOs, everyone in and around the environment. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but in Australia, our professional league or Australia, New Zealand, our professional league is I guess similar to the NFL with regards to the concept, a little bit less money or a lot less money, but still that professional sort of environment, their mentality. In Australia, New Zealand, Pacific population, or in Australia, make up less than 1% of the population. Yet currently in the NRL, the National Rugby League, we're 50% of the playing group. So we've got 50% of the athletes of Pacific background in a country that has less than 1% of the population. So what that sort of says to us as well is 99% of the population probably know very little about Pacific people. And these are the people that are coming in and building the systems and the infrastructure that are supposed to be supporting athletes. But if they don't know about, you know, your whalawe-laves, if they don't know about your Sunday koongais, if they don't know about the loko, if they don't know about the cultural sort of differences, very hard for them to set up an environment to cater for it. So I think for us, it was also a big challenge to be able to help the environment understand the cultural nuances that come with Pacific people, and then create environments that can help them flourish. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Paulie, but
no, it does. You're setting up the stage. I think the big difference, you know, there's also that stat where, you know, 60% you have the chances of getting into the NFL being of Pacific Islander heritage is higher than any other ethnicity, and looking at those stats on a professional league side, I think you touched on it. If less than 1% of the population that is watching a sport that has 50% of its players are Pacific Island or considered from Oceania or Pacifica, what was your biggest hurdle that you had to face first? Like, did you walk in? I mean, obviously after you retired, you walked in there, and obviously in the head office, there was probably what, 500 of you already working there?
I walked into head office on my first day, and I was the only brown person in there. And we probably had about maybe 80 to 100 people in the office. That wasn't a big organization. I mean, big enough, but the fact that at the time we were about 35% of the athlete population. So there was still a big discrepancy and difference with regards to what we see on the field and what we see off the field. So one of the first things I wanted to do was to try and get more Pacific people behind the scenes, coaches, trainers, football staff, managers, administration, the whole works. So I built a recruitment and retention program for our Pacific athletes and try to identify players that I thought, or athletes that I thought would be good for the environment behind the scenes, were capable and able, but also had the credibility amongst the group, understood the needs of the community, and people that were passionate about giving back. So off the back of that, we set up a program that channeled in athletes into the environment. We've got probably behind the scenes now, out of 100, we've probably got about I think maybe between 10 and 15 in the office at the moment. And all in different departments. We've got some in community, we've got some in commercial, we've got some in marketing, we've got some in football operations. And what it does, and we've spoken about this plenty of times before, Paulie, but if I was Russian and I was in here talking to you guys and just sharing about Russia, I'm guessing, and I'm only just guessing here, that most of you guys would take some new information and new understanding away in the next hour about Russia just by speaking to someone. So if I was in there spending all day with you, or working side by side with you, as a Tongan, as a Samoan, as a Niuean, as a Tokelauan, as a Fijian, what I envisage is that person would actually help educate those people around them. And the more we could do that, the more the system could actually understand. I used to get a lot of phone calls from clubs across the board, and one of them rang me one day and said, listen, none of your guys want to talk on TV. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, I go into the change rooms and they got the guitar out and they're singing and they're laughing and they're all comedians and they're all smiling and they got the biggest smiles and they're all so cheerful. We come in there with the cameras to try and record them for an interview. No one wants to talk, And so it was just different, getting them to understand different nuances about Pacific people. And I'd say to them, well, we had another team ring up and said, listen, we want to make this guy part of our leadership group. Like a group of players that sort of, I guess, drive the culture of the environment. Everyone looks up to him. Everyone respects him. He's well regarded. He's a great athlete. On and off the field, he's a great person. But he didn't want to be involved, and they didn't know why. And so I spoke to him. I said, "Oh, listen, I'll give him a call and have a chat and see how we go." And I spoke to him, and what I found out is, so he was a Māori kid from New Zealand. And he didn't feel that he had done enough for the Māori community in his time to be able to take on that leadership role in his team. Because what he was thinking was, man, if I take on this leadership role in the team and I'm the captain, my people back home are going, he's over there helping all those people with all his influences and all his help. What's he doing for us? So it actually put him in a predicament where he felt that he needed to give back to his community first to be comfortable before giving back to another environment or another community or this new community, And so he didn't want to borrow it. So what we did, we actually created programs for him, or created some support for him to be able to connect back to his community back in New Zealand, and basically just let them know he hasn't forgotten them. He's still helping them. He's still there. He's still connected. And as you know, disconnection is a big thing for our people, right? So he connected with them again, was comfortable with that, and then the following season moved into the leadership role and went on to stay there for a while. And he understood how to balance the connection between both worlds, and I think that was really important for not just him, but for the system to understand it.
Beautiful. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put in. George has got his hand raised up. George, if you can unmute yourself, and then we'll come to you, Serafina, right after.
Yeah. Hey, Paul. I remember you were talking about how there's a big drop off, let's say with football from college to pros. But what you need to look at is there's 120 D1 colleges, okay? In high school, a lot of Polynesians would get a scholarship. Scholarship is a 5-year scholarship, whereas 4 years of eligibility, 1 year redshirt. And there's 100 players for that D1. So you're gonna have to look like, let's say if you're the top 25 from D1, and there's like about 120 D1s. So yeah, you have to understand in the NFL draft, they only draft like probably 230 players every year. So you're looking at like roughly 5% of all those players are going to be drafted from college. So that is the drop off right there. The thing is that you have to understand, hey, it's a dog eat dog world, and NFL is not for long, you know. So, and at the same time, especially with our community, you'll see a lot of like parents or overbearing parents, you know, like taking advantage of, hey, you know, what they have because their kid is a star at college. But I just wanted to touch up with what you were trying to backtrack on Paul about where the big draw is and the drop off between college and NFL. And since education is they're giving you a free scholarship, take advantage of that. Let's say, you know, if you're not going to make it in the NFL, at least, you know, have a background in whatever you're majoring to get that degree out of that football scholarship.
Thank you, George. I guess what I meant by the drop off is those that actually make it into the NFL don't stay in the NFL for long, and it's not because of their ability to play. It's because of certain things like being put on a stage where they go from being around a community to all of a sudden seeing snow. Some of our kids have never been around snow. And, you know, especially when you're recruiting in kids from the islands, and, you know, I've had this conversation with the Sarah Tualo. When you come off from Hawaii, you come to the mainland, that in itself is its own culture shock. There are different things that the reason I'm saying that is I'm very well aware of the drop off because of, you know, the numbers, George. It's one of the things that the NFL had asked Nigel was, hey, how do you keep, like they would hire, you know, they'd bring in some of these star Pacific Islander athletes, but they had no idea what to do with them. That's what I was getting to.
Okay, understood.
And Nigel, you know, maybe you can touch on that on your work with the NFL, Nigel.
Yeah. So, so a few years ago, I went and spoke at a conference in Orlando, Florida.
Yes,
and
Florida. It's in Florida.
Is that Florida? Yeah. And we spoke about some of the programs. Like we got invited over, me and another guy from the NRL. And we spoke about they wanted us to speak on something that was different to what they were doing in the US, and we didn't know. I didn't really know what they were doing over there with athletes behind the scenes. So we just spoke on our cultural programs and a game that we set up, an all-star game that we set up, and then some of the programs off the back of it for our cultural athletes. And then from there, we had some people in the crowd there that approached me afterwards and asked me in more detail about that sort of stuff, and all different organizations there, the MLB and the basketball and the NFL and what have you. But a big question that they were having, or a big challenge they were having in the NFL was they were getting a lot of these players in, but a lot of the players didn't feel comfortable in those environments and were just leaving. And we had the same challenge in the NRL, where we would have guys that would come in there, would get a contract, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, get a pro contract, and then not feel comfortable in the environment, but also not feel comfortable seeing anyone behind the scenes that they could actually talk to, that they felt understood where they were coming from. We had one guy who had a funeral in Tonga, and he jumped on a plane and went to the islands. 3 or 4 days later, the club's trying to find him. Couldn't find him. They ring me and they said, listen, one of the players has gone overseas back to Tonga somewhere. We don't know where and we don't know why. We just want to make sure he's all right, and we check him. So I tracked him down through the coconut grapevine, you know, and he pretty much said to me that he went back for a funeral. It was his uncle's funeral. but he didn't know how long he was going to be back there for. It might have been 3 days, it might be 3 weeks, because he lived on a little island. You had to fly into Tonga and then catch another plane to go to another island, and a little boat to go to the last one. But he didn't know when he was coming back. And he said that when he got to training and he wanted to tell someone that he was leaving the next day, he looked around at training and didn't think anyone was going to understand. And he actually thought that they were going to tell him not to go. So he thought to himself, I'm not telling anyone. I'm just going to do my training. After training, I'm going to go to back home, pack my bags, go to the airport, and he left. And that's the kind of environment that that we had to sort of, nurture and deal with, and some of the environment that the NFL were trying to understand how to incorporate in their systems a bit better, considering the numbers of Pacific athletes in their environment that are coming through the drafting and getting drafted, increasing every year. So they were just trying to understand how to set up more diverse systems across the board, and also help. So I was working with the head office at NFL New York, and they wanted to understand how we did it here, so they could create those systems or help the club set up those systems if they felt they need to. So it was more just building an environment that Pacific athletes felt they could be comfortable in and going to chat to someone. Now, if this guy couldn't chat to them about catching a plane and going to his uncle's funeral, what if he was going through some mental health challenges, which would have been an even harder task to communicate. So we try to sort of make sure that in our environment at every club, there's specific people behind the scenes and involved in the environment, which we're at the moment, which is great. And then off the back of that, just keep building and building as we go along.
Thank you.
That makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. Serafina, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I don't know, Nigel, if you have an answer, but this is so Mighty Paul brought it up in his question that he was asking you, and he brought up how within our community there are parents, and right now I mean I'm witnessing it with my cousin. There are parents that quit their jobs and are banking on their kids to making it to the league. And my cousin, who's only 20 years old, he just got injured. He getting ready for the combine, he got injured, and it applies so much pressure on him. I talked to him, and it's just he feels so much pressure on his shoulders, because not only is it his parents that he feels that he needs to take care of, if he makes it to the league, but now, like my grandmother is on it, like, oh, my grandson's gonna buy me a truck, gonna buy him, and I just, and it's just within our community, I know, is like, of course, taking care of our parents, but it's just like, and like our family, but it's just like, how do we change that perspective? And how do we change? I don't know. I feel like, how do we change that? Because seeing the amount of pressure that it comes on, like the amount of pressure that my cousin feels, because now he has his own family, so I don't know if you have an answer, but when Mighty Paul brought that up into his question, it's just, how do we change that, in terms of our, in terms of the parents banking on their kid, their son to make it to the league? How do we change that? And I know, there are some parents and some people that, like, they're kind of just stuck in that mindset in terms of, like the old school, the Fa'asamoa way, of course, but something's got to change, and it's just like, how do we change that? Because at the end of the day, I don't think they realize how much pressure, that their kid feels. So that's my question.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for your question, Fina. That's big challenge, and we have similar challenges down here. I remember talking to a guy at one of these conferences in the States, and he said the biggest challenge that they have right across the board in a lot of sports, and it's also not specific to Pacific athletes. A lot of other cultures and people are similar, where the parents are living their dreams through the kids. For a lot of them, but for others, it's the pressure from the parents is the biggest challenge that they have in the tennis. I was talking to, did some stuff with the tennis over there, and they said they did a little experiment, and they went to a tournament, a teenager or kids tournament, whatever it was, and they got a whole heap of chips, like packets of chips and stuff, and they left, and they just put them on the side there in a big sort of barrel for all the kids when they come through. Right, you grab a little packet of chips and you grab your drink or whatever, and you go through. And they actually just watched how many of the parents open the bag of chips for the kids, as opposed to letting the kids open it themselves. And they said it would have been easy, over 80% of the parents open the bag of chips for the kids. And what they were sort of trying to look at and research was how, and I know in the US, I was talking to a guy who had a basketball story around, if a kid doesn't make their team, the high school team, and George spoke about it earlier, about the number of schools and the number of programs that you got across the country over there. It's huge. If they don't make the basketball team in the local school, what some of these parents will do, well, they'll pull them out and they'll go put him in another school so he can make the team there. And if he doesn't make the team there, they'll pull him out and they'll go to another school and make the team until he makes the first 5. But what that's actually doing, even by opening the chips, is actually they're not giving the kids, they're not building up that resilience within the kids, and they're mothering them. And that's right across the board. I guess with our Pacific people, you spoke about, Fina, about the whāsā more and the cultural elements that come into play. Me and my wife were just talking about this yesterday, how it's an avenue out for a lot of our people, right? It's an avenue out. If you come from an environment that's struggling, and you've got a kid who runs pretty quick, or can bounce a ball pretty good, or can pass, or can tackle, there's actually an opportunity for him to help the community or help the family, right? It's that communal mentality where everyone chips in. But we've actually got someone in amongst us who just happens to be a child, who actually could potentially go into this environment that could help all of us. And I spoke to a parent a couple of years ago who had 2 sons moving into this environment, and I said to her, she goes, how do I look after my boys better? Because I want to make sure I give them every opportunity to succeed. I said, oh, okay, well, what do you do for them now? I'll take them to training, and I'll wait till after training, and then I'll drive them home. I'll drop them off at school so that they're not tired for training. I'll make sure there's enough food for them and that sort of stuff. And she was actually quite genuine in her support for her sons. And she goes, I just want to give them every opportunity. I don't want to pressure them, but I just want to give them every opportunity. And I said, well, that's great, but this is what the son sees. He sees mum driving me everywhere to training, mum picking me up everywhere from training, mum getting me food everywhere, mum getting me to school and back so I can rest up for training. So now if I've got an opportunity, what am I going to do? I'm going to thank mum, right? I'm going to give back to mum because she gave me all this stuff, so now I owe her. And she goes, no, it's not like that. And I said, yeah, but you haven't had that conversation. You haven't had that conversation. And if you don't have that conversation, there's a fine line between support and pressure. And I think, and what we got down to when we were sort of breaking it down was communication. Now, I know some parents are fixed, right? That's it. This is what we're doing. I don't care what you say. My son's playing NFL, my daughter's playing NBA, whatever it is, and some parents are sort of quite particular. We've had families move over as well, relocate to where their child is playing as well over here. So it's not foreign to us. But what we're trying to do is trying to give the athlete, when you're in the system, give the athlete avenues to be able to talk to someone else, whether it might be usually the youngest uncle is probably the closest mentality to some of our guys that we found. So when I was coming through the environment, I actually didn't feel pressured by my parents, and I'm not sure why. Every now and then they'd ring up, someone's getting married, so we need to put a, we need to put a lafunga in, and contribute, which is cool. Obviously that contribution to that communal mentality where how much you give and how much you can give, is another, that's another sort of area of that we need to tidy up, I think, a bit. But a big, I think the biggest challenge for the athletes and their parents is communication. And you know what? Even when they're not an athlete, if you're not the oldest child in the family, you're not talking anyway. You know, we've got a whole heap of guys in our environment that don't talk. And when the clubs don't know why, I say, you know what? Have a look at his siblings. He's probably not the oldest, because only the oldest talks for us. Like, I wasn't the oldest, you know, so I'd come into the environment and they go, what do you kids want to do? Oh, I don't know. You know, ask Ralph, ask Player, you know, and then we're doing whatever they're doing because they're the oldest. But we know that as specific people. But in an environment, if you don't know that, how do you cater for that? And how do you sort of set up opportunities for the kids to be able to come out of their shell? Because right across the board, our kids don't talk, which is a big challenge, whether it's in athletics, whether it's in life choices and decision making and mental health. And if they're not talking to anyone else, they're definitely not talking to their parents, you know. So, and you know what, the parents have probably come through the same environment, through the same generation where they didn't talk, you know. So it's that systematic environment that just keeps ticking over. The only difference is, instead of getting a job in an office where you can make some good money now, you might be able to get a job on a field or on a basketball court where you can make some even better money. So it's the same system, just a different environment. But we're just perpetuating that same, I guess, lack of communication styles across that intergenerational environment.
Melissa had something she wanted to add into the conversation. Melissa, you can unmute. Thank you, Serafino.
So I want to preface what I'm about to say is that I'm not trying to knock anybody, but I think there is a community responsibility here. And I say that because there are more Pacific Islanders in positions of power and decision in sports than there are in any other field, right? So we're perpetuating to our own kids and our own community that there's a certain pressure to go into sports, right? And I recognize that some of them are ex-players or they played in it in some capacity. So that's, you know, that's kind of a natural transition. But at the same time, it's like we're putting a lot of pressure on our kids to get a 4-year scholarship and then to get into the NFL. And then if they don't make the NFL, you're X, you're done. Like, thank you, you were useless. And our parents say that to our kids. I've heard it over and over again. Like, okay, why didn't you get into the school? Or you didn't do so good in the game today. So now what? Oh, you messed up your leg. What's wrong with you? Now you're not going to get your scholarship, or now nobody's going to look at you. And we as a community can help in changing that narrative. You know what I'm saying? And so, Nigel, as you're speaking, it's kind of triggering to me because we need to love our kids where they are. And some of them aren't ready to play sports. In the video we saw in the last segment, there was a young man who was like, yeah, I'm getting pressure to play sports. I don't even like sports. But because there's this natural assumption that every big kid should be playing football, especially if you're Pacific Islander, that's another added layer of pressure for him. Even if he doesn't want to play, even if he's not good at it, guess what? He's likely to start anyway, because coaches say, oh, you're a big dude, we'll just stick you in the front and you're just going to just follow the ball and hit anybody who's trying to get it. I've heard coaches say that to our people, to our young men, right? So nobody is sticking up for our kids in that sense. Our parents, I understand why parents really feel like that's an important avenue for our young people to go through. Is yes, there is a potential that you'll be successful and be able to support your family, right? But at what cost? Because if he's only going to be in the NFL for 2 to 3 years, I'm pretty sure he spent all his money on all his fatongia, K.A.V.A of his family, and wasn't even able to purchase a home, right? Because that then the culture plays a huge role in it of how you're going to help your families. And so I am getting to my question, Nigel. That's all right. That's all right. I just wanted to set some context to it, right? Is that, and I also wanted to say that, you know, a lot of our families and our community, you know, we will give up everything to ensure that our young people have opportunities. And I often don't see enough giving up for, you know, education, or to go into trades, or to do
The
something
arts,
else.
the arts.
Right? There's just a lot of pressure just kind of for sports. And so if we stay in that lane, then we've narrowed ourselves as a community to expand into other fields. So I guess my question for you is, you know, we know New Zealand, Australia, and all the islands in the Pacific are very big on rugby. And I also know that New Zealand has a very high level of professionals that are Pacific Islander. How are people differentiating with not going into rugby and going into mental health or becoming a doctor? So I'm wondering, what is sort of the narrative in New Zealand about that? Are people having those types of conversations? Because I would love to see more doctors and more therapists and more professionals outside of sports. And I'm just wondering what the narrative is in New Zealand that's increasing Pacific Islanders in professions like that. And I'm gonna stop talking, I promise.
No, it's okay.
No,
Sorry, Nigel. I just saw that Dr. Foliaki has joined us.
this would be a perfect question for him.
Yeah, and Dr. Foliaki, if you can hear us, first of all, let me apologize for giving you the wrong time. I was using Melissa's clock when I gave you the time. I'm throwing you under the bus, Melissa, on purpose. So we won't take it together. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Paul, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Apologies.
Dr.
When I opened up my...
Dr. Foliaki, if I could, sorry, Nigel, I'm just going to pause and if I could just make your introduction, because I've been able to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that it's late. It's my fault. I'll fall on the sword. Dr. Siale Foliaki is the first fellow of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists of Tongan heritage. In 2012, he was asked by the Nevada District Attorney's Office to undertake a psychiatric assessment of the only Tongan on death row in the states of Nevada. His forensic psychiatry opinion led to the Supreme Court of the United States of America's decision to send this case back to retrial. As a result, the experience Dr. Foliaki is critical for the criminal justice system, handling of young Pacific offenders as they enter into the criminal justice system as adolescents. Dr. Foliaki has undertaken extensive research projects in the health survey and demonstrated that New Zealand-born Pacific people had double the rate of mental disorder as Pacific-born and double the rates of serious mental disorder. That's a huge number. The research suggested strongly that the socio-cultural detriments of mental disorder had a significant influence on the internalizing or the suicidal behavior and the externalizing the aggressive, homicidal, and obviously violent behavior indicated by the increasing rates of self-harm, suicide, and assault. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Foliaki.
Thank you for the introduction, Paul, and apologies. Again, I was just setting up for our 9 o'clock session when I saw that you'd been texting me. I've been traveling the length of the country is the reason why I haven't been able to, I've just checked my phone after landing in a place called Hamilton, which is, south of where I live in Auckland. So is our session going to sort of run through until 9? Is that correct?
No, if it's okay with everybody, if I could tip a little over, I think I'm going to lean a little. Just go until they tell us to stop, Doc.
Okay, and look, apologies, I'm not too sure whether, what sort of questions and how the narrative has gone with the discussion with you and Nigel this morning, because professional sport is a huge...
We're just leading up to the point where there's pressures put on athletes to become successful in professional sports, to become the meal ticket for the family. We've also touched a little bit on the difference in the cultural nuances in the professional scene and not having enough representation in that scene. But we were just about to tip into the part where, the violence that's created, I shouldn't say violence is created, the frustration that's created that leads to different, violence and whatnot. So,
yeah. So I'd like to make some general comments, because our sports stars, they come out of our community. Yep. And they are a reflection of our community. And so I just want to, say some things about the population in New Zealand. If you think about success and what drives success in any field. You know, you think about the stability of our family units, right? Migration has disrupted the stability of our family units, which means that as a people, we, before our kids even begin on their journey to, you know, I heard, sorry, I forgot the lady's name, talking about, Pacific people ending up in professions, you know, medicine, for example, you know, and what is the pathway to that? And I just want to, you know, talk about, just think for a second, you know, what are the drivers of a young person ending up in jail? So, for example, in the New Zealand jurisdiction, just think about this for a second. About 100 European people per 100,000 end up in jail, right? For the Pacific population, it's about 330, so it's 3 times that. Yeah, and for the Maori indigenous people of New Zealand, it's about 660, you know, so 6 times the rate. If you're Maori, you have 6 times the rate of likelihood of ending up in jail. And, you know, what are the reasons that sit in behind that? And so, you know, I want to talk a little bit about, you know, if in New Zealand, I don't know what the American system is like. You know, there's graduation, year 13 or our 7th form year 13. If you get to year 13 in New Zealand, your chances of having contact with the criminal justice system is only 3%, right? But if you leave school at year 11, which is our level 1 NCA, I don't know what the American equivalent is, but it's like leaving school with some formal qualification. Right?
GED, it would be the GED in America.
So you think about that. A lot of our sports stars, this is where sport really matters to us. A lot, if you leave high school without without that lowest form of qualification, your chances of entering the criminal justice system is 50%. 50%. So let me give you a sense. For the indigenous Maori people, their young people leave the schooling system. 49.8% of them do not have a qualification. Right? So that means that 50% of those kids are going to have contact with the criminal justice system. And what that means is if you look at the population of people in prison in New Zealand, yeah, 50% of the prison population are of Maori ethnicity. Yeah, the justice system is education. Education really matters. And so if you think about sports stars, a lot of them, they know they're good at sport. The family put pressure on them. They actually start to move away from education as a pathway much, much earlier than the age of 15. So what we're seeing now is 11, 12, 13-year-olds, the kids that are really good at sport are already in a sporting channel. They're in that lane, which means education isn't going to be prominent. It's not going to be a driver. When I look at the US sports system, you know, so many of the sports stars, LeBron James, for example, has to go through this high school education process, college education process. We know that education is a stabilizing influence in terms of people's ability to manage not just their professional lives, but their personal lives. But then here's the crux of the matter. Only a very small percentage of Pacific athletes will go on to professional careers. And for example, and rugby league is our number 1 pathway here, and rugby union. But the majority, if you look at the average length of time that somebody spends in what we call our NRL, which would be, say, the equivalent of the National Football League of gridiron in America, the average number of games that are, you know, Nigel played a number of games, but the average number is about 39. So the career, even if you break into it, because of the heavy contact nature of it, you only spend a very short time in there. And if all your investment is in there, you know, where does it leave you if you can't forge a career in sport? So these are just some of my opening comments, because what I want us to understand as a community is what drives the professional sport. And professional sport, we know that we have the physical attributes to succeed. But we know there are some other drivers that I want to talk about, but I don't want to talk too long without potentially taking some questions from our audience. I just wanted to set the scene a wee bit.
Oh no, this is good. This is good, Doc. This is good, Doc. You got our minds moving.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. And I just want some introductory comments. It's much more complicated than what I'm describing. There's lots more factors that lead people to be successful or to fail. And success breeds a certain type of mental state that protects us from aggression and protects us from violence, right? And even if you look at the prison population, one comment I want to make to the audience is that there are really big differences in the types of crimes each of the ethnic groups go into prison for. So the Tongans in New Zealand, we have the highest, if we go to jail, the main reason we go to jail is because of a physical assault, of aggressive behavior. The other Pacific communities enter jail for other types of criminal offending, like burglary and stealing cars and other stuff, right? But the Tongans, we enter jail at the highest proportion because of physically aggressive, physically assaultative behavior. So there are differences between our communities and the types of the levels of aggression. There are differences, and how do we explain that using a cultural lens? And I might just stop there, Paul. I feel like I've said enough.
Oh, no. We're listening. We want to know why Tongans are so damn aggressive. What about the Samoans? What about the Niueans? What about the Maoris?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, man. And you know, the Niueans have so for example, in the prison population right now, 41% of all prisoners in New Zealand are of Samoan ethnicity, 41%. 25% are of Cook Island ethnicity, 20% are of Tongan ethnicity. The Niueans, there are more Niueans in New Zealand than there are Tongans, but they only make up 3% of the population of the prison muster. So we should ask ourselves some really important questions about what is it about the cultural differences between us that lead to really higher rates of imprisonment for certain population groups, and what is it about the Tongans in particular that make us so aggressive? You know, these are really important questions, and I do think that there are answers to these questions, and some of the answers you can't use a Western lens. You know, it's really interesting. There's a bloke, what's his name? Nathan DeVal. He's a professor at Kentucky State University, and he's got, you know, they're social psychologists, and they've got a theory. What's their theory called? It's called the general aggression model. They call it GAME, right? And it has three specific things that they identify that leads to aggression. And when I look at that, it's a very monocultural theory. It doesn't really take into consideration some of the concepts that drive us as a community. So, for example, oh no, I won't get into it too deeply at this stage. I just sort of, again, you keep making me talk, Paul, and I'm much more interested in hearing our audience and taking any questions.
I'm going to allow you to take a pause if you all have any questions. As you can see, Dr. Siale is very passionate, very, very passionate about this, and is very knowledgeable about our people when it comes to this kind of stuff. We may just have to invite him back to have his own little panel another day. But with that being said, if anyone has any questions, this is the time. I see Dr. Tovo over there itching. I don't know what you're doing over there, Dr. Tovo. You can unmute.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Foliaki, and to Nigel for sharing a lot of your perspectives, especially from the context of Aotearoa, because I think a lot of us as Americans or Pacific Islander Americans, we tend to just stay in our hub of the continent of the US, right? So the understandings of how we understand our families, our cultures, really does just only, the grasp happens here in the US. So listening to that, a lot of conversations between either us being overrepresented in sports and also in incarceration is very connected here in America as well. And I think that something that you said earlier, Dr. Foliaki, was that migration, the impact of migration is something that we don't really talk about a lot here in America, of the consequences that come from that. So when Nigel talks about the rugby conversations in football and how our families see our falabelaves, we don't often think about our parents' it's communicated the way that they pressure us to be into sports, because that's basically what our parents only see, you know, our families to do, or our families to be successful in. And so they perpetuate a lot of like their insecurities because they don't know what else or resources that we have. So just listening to both of your conversations shows me that I really have to continue to learn more about our culture outside of America and using diaspora, because I've been using the word diaspora a lot today, and using conversations of diasporas from Aotearoa or diasporas from Australia. It really does help unite a lot of this miscommunications that we have, that Ray talked about earlier, with our parents really saying some things that they don't mean to hurt us, but it does hurt us. As an ex-athlete going into college, I think that the narrative of us not being in, it was always the, if we don't do this, if we don't become stars in our sports, then we become failures, even if we do well in school. And so I think being able to listen to a lot of the conversations that Nigel has, and even the questions that were brought up by everyone else today about that conversation of resources, I think it really is important for us as diasporas to unite from other countries, especially from Australia and Aotearoa, because then we find doctors like Dr. Foliaki coming in to help out. I think you're the one that helped out
Yes.
someone come off death row here
Yes.
in America.
Yes, that was
Yeah.
a very interesting experience. Yeah.
And so those kind of conversations happen because us in America, we always think that we have the answer and that we're the answer, but we don't actually realize that if we can lean on our brothers and sisters of Oceania in other places like Australia and New Zealand and Aotearoa, we really can find more resources, I think, Ray, like more conversations that are happening. Just to kind of go on a tangent of what Nigel was saying, I was thinking about resources that may happen for parents in Aotearoa to be able to find connections with students, or with students or young Pacifica people growing. And what Aotearoa have that we don't have here in America is Samoan and Tongan median and Maori median schools when they're young, right?
Yes.
Where they're able to identify with their language at home first before having the language of America. And we don't have that here. And maybe that might be a way where we could connect students at a younger age, parents who are coming into a new, into a new world where we do have our Pauls and our Rays supporting these matters of like hard conversations, because it's really easy for us to be, because America is a really big continent, that we tend to be lost within our own continent and not actually realize that we are people of ocean, and that we actually have much, much more grasp of resources than we actually know of. So I really want to thank Nigel and Dr. Foliaki for enlightening us with more conversations and heartaches, because listening to these incarceration numbers, y'all, to me, it seems like it's not like just a PI problem. It's an issue of any time we are our diaspora, meaning we are physically disconnected from our homelands. Malo.
Thank you so much for that,
Yep.
Dr. Tovo.
Actually, sorry, Paulie, I just want to reply before I forget. But one of the things, and one of the things that surprised a lot of people. So when we set up leadership camps over here, cultural leadership camps in the NRL, in the rugby league, and it was basically getting the Pacific guys from all the different teams, bring them together and empower them to understand more about their identity. Leave your boots at home. We're going to teach you about migration. We're going to teach you about colonization, about religion, about the whole sort of journey of our people of the last 500 years. I didn't know that. So I had to bring in some doctors of the Pacific Studies, a friend of mine, Dr. Rowena Nashu, who's head of the Pacific Studies program in Australia, right, at ANU. And so we did some stuff together, did some work together. Off the back of that, I said to her, listen, we're the sports. We've got the traction to get to the kids, to get to the community. We've got the channels that can get the message out there. But you guys have all the information. So if we work together, you give us all the information, we work together, and then we'll use our channels to spread the word, right? Because there's more people that, and I remember I did some stuff with the guy named Navy Tusopo, who rest in peace now also. But a few years ago, and we were at USC, And I said to him, do the athletes get animosity from the rest of the school? You know, because they're getting their own cafeteria, their own boarding, their own this and their own that. And he said, yeah, they do. He said, but you know what we say to them? To a lot of the people that hate on the athletes over there, when was the last time 100,000 people showed up to an English exam? Right? So the money and the revenue and the interest that the sporting environment generates for the schools, they treat them a bit different. So we set up a program, and we've been partnering with with Keith. I'm not sure if you know Keith out at UCLA. I mean, he's not there anymore, but we did some work with Keith, who's a doctor out those ways.
Kamuchi.
And yeah, you know Keith. So what we did with him is we set up the program, right? And we're walking through UCLA, and we see a couple of island boys in the football team. And I say to the girls with me at PISA, I say, hey, listen, they look like island boys over there. And they said, yeah, they're part of the football team. I said, oh, okay, sweet. And we're walking towards them, and we get closer, and they walk straight past us. And I'm going, why don't you say hi to them? And they said, oh, we don't know them. I said, yeah, but you're islanders and they're islanders, and there's probably only about 5 of us on the campus right now. But so what I didn't realize is that the athletics world and the academic world in the US, they actually don't connect at all. And if you're Pacific on this side and you're Pacific on this side, you have to stay in your lane. So I was actually really surprised that they don't cross over. Whereas down here, we actually cross over a lot, so we can get the benefits, like you're saying, Doctor. You know, we get the benefits of both worlds, and we can try and use both to assimilate into a program to help, you know, wherever the help is needed. And I was actually really surprised by that. And you just reminded me that when you're an athlete, you're actually taken away from our community a lot. You're in different borders, you're in different cafeterias, you go in a different program, you go to different schools, and you have different schedules. So it's almost like you're plucked out of our environment, you're put here, and then when you finish, they take you and they put you back here. And then you've got to fend for yourself, you know, which is a challenge.
Thank you, guys. Look, I know that is my time. I'm going to reach out to Melissa and the organizers. Can I have an extra minute or two? If so, if not, because I'd like Dr. Siale to give us a little bit more. You're the guy that showed up with the carrot that won't share. So I need more of you, Dr. Siale.
Oh, look, and we probably need to organize another time. You know, my closing comment, Paul, is, you
no,
know,
no closing yet. Let me ask permission first. Susie, Melissa, can I get an extra couple minutes? I don't want to impede on anyone else that's scheduled to come on.
Go ahead. We'll give you a few more minutes. Sure. Thank you.
Malo, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Siale.
You know, if I just put my cultural hat on and speak from a cultural paradigm, and I have to talk from a Tongan perspective because it's unfair to talk from a Niuean or Cook Island perspective when I don't have that heritage. You know, maybe these are Pacific values that we share. You know, the gifts and talents that God gave us, right, was always meant to be an expression of to lift ourselves and lift our families. You know, to kind of honor those gifts and talents, right? And for a greater purpose. And I see the Americanization, the Europeanization, the Western world, you know, it takes our gifts and talents, it commercializes it, yeah, for reasons that don't truly benefit us as a collective, yeah. And when you look at the number of Pacific athletes that come out of that when they've earned significantly large amounts of money, 72 to 75% of all those athletes will be made bankrupt within 5 years of their retirement from professional sport. And so the system, you know, what we have to do as a people is to never lose sight of what our gifts and talents were meant to be. You know, and you know, I watched Nigel. Nigel doesn't realize this. Man. I loved him as a rugby league player. He was always the smallest guy on the field. And when it comes to Polynesians, Nigel's the skinniest, smallest Polynesian on a professional sports field, right? But he was a superstar, and he was a superstar. It had something to do with the spirit, not the size of his biceps, right? And when I listen to Nigel speak, you know, I just think, wow, it's just so cool to hear a professional athlete speak so articulately. You know what I mean? And I can feel how much he cares, you know? And so we should remind ourselves as a people, the gifts and talents we were given was meant for the benefit of all. you know, and if you think about a migrant community, we are wealthy. We are wealthy, but that wealth was never meant for individual enhancement. It was never about the cars and the houses that I see so many of us get caught up in, you know. We've got to be careful that we don't get hypnotized, man, by a Western paradigm that says money is king, because that was never us. And so getting too emotional, guys. It's a very Tongan thing. If Tongans don't cry when they talk, then we're not Tongan. It doesn't hurt enough, you know. It didn't mean enough if we can't bring our hearts and souls to the conversation. So that'll do me, Nigel. Nigel, you don't know me at all, man. I've been a big fan of yours because I love the way that you carried yourself during your sporting career. I always got a sense that sport meant more to you than just making some money. And so you're really grateful to be here with everybody. Hope we get a chance to talk at another time.
Dr. Siale, so just so everybody knows, I reached out to Dr. Siale, and Nigel is a friend of mine. I never met Dr. Siale, and he agreed to come on. I think part of it is because I have an auntie that we share in common that might have threatened him or something. But you know, I've on this call, Dr. Foliaki, I've got several other doctors. I got Dr. K.A.V.A on here also that I see on my screen. This is heartwarming to me. This is something that I know that's much needed. Love your spirit, love your soul. Thank you for being open. Thank you for being vulnerable. I hope that in the hour you spent with Nigel and I and Siale on behalf of K.A.V.A Talks, that it added value to your life. I hope to continue this conversation and have more of these types of conversations. So this is what I'm going to do to everybody, just so I can wrap it up, because I don't like impeding in other people's time. Dr. Siale, if anyone wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Not to add to your already layered of work, but I think part of the talanoa is being able to reach out, and even if they were to reach out and say thank you via social media, you probably don't have it. But what's the best way to get a hold of you if they wanted to?
Can they do it through you, Paul? Because I don't have social media, because I don't know why. Maybe I'm old school. You know, I'm too old, man.
You ain't that old. You're only a year older than me. Calm down. Don't try to put me in the old category. I'm not ready for the double ARP to come give me a membership. Damn it. Stop, boy. Nigel, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? If they want to
through you too, Polly, man. Through you too. I appreciate everyone. Thank you.
This is that coconut. This is that coconut bullshit where you guys are going to turn around and make me the gatekeeper. Look, thank you so much, Melissa. I turned back the time. I know there's tons more conversations and questions coming in. I wish I had more time. I love each and every one of you. Thank you. This is what K.A.V.A Talks is all about. If you have a partner, if you have a friend that wants to know more about us, I don't care what color they are, invite them to K.A.V.A Talks. We're going to talk about this thing. We'll talk it out. Malo, eh? Thank you, Siale.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Arofaku.